At Reliant, we're with you at every milestone, making it easier for you to shine. So you can saddle up each morning for more than a paycheck. Have the support to expand your horizon, the space to grow your family, and your brightest dreams never have to fade. At Reliant, we help you shine. That's brighter banking. Reliant Federal Credit Union.
Welcome to the Greater Conversations podcast. I'm Deetra Miller, the Director of Member Relations and Engagement at Greater Winston-Salem, Inc. We'll use this platform to showcase our local businesses, our community, and their stories. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the show. Today is super exciting. I have here with us Ryan Blackledge. Ryan is the Vice President of Government and External Affairs with Cone Health. Now, because we're in Winston-Salem, many of you are probably familiar with Novant or Atrium Wake Forest Baptist, but you may not be familiar with Cone, and today you're going to get to know them just a little bit more. Ryan, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me, and I'm glad to hear that you are not just excited, but super excited.
I am always super excited, and I
Her
feel
excitement
like
has an S and a red cape.
An S in a red cape. It does. It does. Well, the fact that you and I have talked via email for a few months since Cone has been a member of Greater Winston-Salem, I'm just excited to have you here in person to share more about Cone and yourself with everybody listening today.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So for everyone that's listening, I just want to share a little bit about Ryan. He has been with Cone Health since 2015. Prior to that, he was a staff attorney at the North Carolina General Assembly for 7 years. And of course, there's some other juicy nuggets that he'll share with us about his background. I'm just kidding. They're not too juicy. We're not going to get into it. No, I'm just kidding. Of course, your life is juicy.
There's all sorts of interesting things we can get into.
Well, good.
I should break out the adult beverages.
Break out the adult beverages. No, we're not going to do that. But one cool thing that I think is the fact that you have a law background, that you are an attorney, and that experience has somehow, I'm assuming, shaped your trajectory and path into healthcare. And we'll talk a little bit about that later. But for everyone listening, share a little bit about who you are.
So, yeah, as you mentioned, I've been with Cone Health for 10 years, just about, be 10 years in January. And prior to that, had a great job at the General Assembly. So worked nonpartisan central staff, so did things for the Democrats, did things for the Republicans, members of the House, members of the Senate, and I was one of several lawyers in the bill drafting division. So, if you remember Schoolhouse Rock, how an idea becomes a law, all that. There's actually a lot of detailed legal work that goes into preparing that bill, and that was what I did. So someone would come with an idea, sometimes with just a problem, and say, hey, what can we do? And I would write the actual legislation that got introduced.
How fun must that have been?
It was so much fun, and after our division finished with all the bills that were introduced, we then switched to the budget bill. So there was a separate research division.
Okay.
And they would staff the committees. But we then, as I said, moved over to handle the state budget. So for, I think, 5 years there, I wrote transportation legislation and did the transportation budget for the state.
Wow.
Me and then some folks in the fiscal research team that focused on the numbers, and I wrote all the language that went into the legislation.
That's pretty amazing. And you also, if I read correctly, drafted healthcare legislation.
I did. So so things like the Medicaid expansion that eventually passed in 2023. A lot of that was stuff that I had written years prior because I was covering Medicaid when the Affordable Care Act was passed. And so every year I would have several bills from Democrats to expand Medicaid. So wrote those bills, but then also wrote the bill that eventually became the law that the Republican majority passed to say, no, only the General Assembly can decide. Governor can't expand Medicaid on his or her own. And so it was really, really neat. So did that. I also covered the state health plan for a while.
Wow.
So state health plan and also health insurance.
Okay.
But state health plan, I think now has got might be up to 725, but 1,000 enrollees, because all the state employees, and that includes all of the teachers throughout the state, they're all on that plan. So them plus dependents, whether spouses or children, and that is it at the time was having some issues in terms of finances and management, and so one of the big things I did was a rewrite of all of the statutes and sent it over to the Department of the State Treasurer. Up until then, it had sort of been its own sort of entity that the legislature supervised through a committee, but there was a desire to send it over to executive branch with someone who had the full-time job with the state as opposed to the part-time legislature to keep an eye on it.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is amazing. So what kind of, now this is veering off from the cone discussion a little bit.
Okay.
But what does it take to write those statutes? Like, how much research goes into that, and how big did your team have to be to help you do all of that?
Yeah, so it depends. Sometimes, as I mentioned earlier, you had just an idea of something. Sometimes it wasn't even an idea. Sometimes it was a problem. Sometimes it was something that a lobbyist had given to a legislator and said, hey, can you get this into a bill? Interestingly, those were sometimes the challenging ones because you had to explain to a legislator why something that a lobbyist was asking for was already North Carolina law, or how, this would violate our state constitution, even though they've done it in all these other states. But it really it was time looking at what other states may have done on it. You had to be familiar with the subject areas that you covered. So the way that it was divided up, every lawyer covered just different areas. So when I was there, I mentioned transportation, healthcare. Also covered tax law for a little bit. Corporate structures, and a few other things here and there, but you had to know it. And a lot of times there were things, I was the only lawyer at the General Assembly with any admiralty law experience from law school, and so I covered navigation, and 9 times out of 10 a request was something where I just sent an email back to say, nope, sorry, that's a navigable waterway that is preempted by federal law and we can't do anything. But you had to know your subject areas.
Wow. How did this prepare you for where you are now, your position at Cone?
So I do a lot with the current position. So, cover local, state, federal government. Right now it's a team of 2 of us that are doing that. There is so much, though, that the state does or can do to make it either easier or harder to provide patients care.
Interesting. Okay, say more.
And so there are sometimes, and this is a challenge in any field. Healthcare, in engineering, in banking, but you've got folks who day in, day out do the work, know the business, know the federal regulations, all of that. Something happens, and there is sometimes a knee-jerk reaction of, there ought to be a law to prevent that. Sometimes there already is a law, and you don't necessarily need a new one. Sometimes people need to be educated about it. Sometimes there needs to be better enforcement. But the background of having worked on writing the laws, as well as sort of how it operates, and then also, there's still folks there who were serving in the legislature who were there when I was on staff that I know.
Okay.
All of that comes together to build up, and then help when you're trying to advance legislation, when you're trying to think through what new public policy solutions might be. All of that comes into play to help. It's certainly not necessary. There are a lot of very successful folks that lobby the state legislature, federal government, don't have a law degree, and certainly haven't worked as a lawyer for a legislative body. But I found that it's really, really helpful.
Wow. Since you've been with Cone, what things have you fought for, if you will, to get passed?
So the biggest long-term push was Medicaid expansion, which I had mentioned earlier. Finally got that legislation passed 2023, and it was December 1st of last year that finally went live. That was, I think it was 12 years or so after the Affordable Care Act. It was a long time. Some of the challenges when it was first an option for the state is it really was, by those who were advocating for it, it was put in very stark moral terms. Either you expand Medicaid and you're a good person, you're a good legislator, or you don't and you're a terrible person and you hate people and you shouldn't be in office. It really was. If your listeners can think back to the Moral Monday protests, for example, Medicaid expansion was one of the big ideas. And unfortunately, when you tell folks who, many of whom very conservative, Christian, very, very driven by faith and caring, just have a disagreement on what government should or should not do, and you take those folks and you say, you're not moral, they're not going to listen to you. You're going to put up a wall. And so after a number of years of that not working, there were some of us that spent some time going around talking to people who are interested in Medicaid expansion, saying, look, we need to take a different path. One of the things that was done, the Cone Health Foundation, which is affiliated with Cone Health, a sort of a sibling organization. It's actually a nonprofit that was created when the Wesley Long Community Hospital joined with the Moses Cone Hospital. And when you have a nonprofit transaction like that, there's usually a spinoff with a nonprofit entity that's supposed to, in the case of hospitals, look out for the health of the community. So that was the Cone Health Foundation. They put money along with KB Reynolds Charitable Trust to fund an economic study of, hey, if we were to expand Medicaid, this is what the benefit would be for the state. And even there was a county by county, this is what the benefit would be.
Okay.
So that advocates could go to any county, talk to any elected official or community member and say, here's what we're missing out on. So that was trying to get to the data rather than just making that moral argument. Having that data then supported the business case. So there was then a lot of time spent going around, grassroots education to the business community. So chambers of commerce, particularly in rural areas of the state, going through. Totally realistically, though, I think a big thing that finally helped was when the federal government added the signing bonus money. That was something that came with some of the COVID legislation, and at that point, with all the other sort of logical arguments, it then became too good of a deal for the state to pass up. So that's certainly something that big success. A lot of work on that. one thing, just because if we talk about positives, I feel we should be frank about negatives, things we haven't solved. That I find a lot of people don't know about is the number of folks who are living in emergency departments because they don't have any other place to go. A lot of these, yes, a lot of these are kids who are, for their guardians, it's Department of Social Services, and what we will often see is, these will be kids that, years ago we would have said troubled youths, but they and typically, understandably, are angry at the world. They lash out. If you look at the background, these kids have had just a tough time. Yeah. Not shown nearly the love that most people get when they grow up. And so these kids, the state is their guardian, and they might be living in a group home, and they get upset about something. They act out. The group home says, "We don't know what to do with them. We didn't like how they were acting out. We think there might be a psychological issue," and they take them to the emergency department. We do our standard look where we go, all right, nope, no medical, physical health issues, and nope, they do not need to be in a behavioral health hospital. And then we will call up the group home and say, all right, they're all good. Can you come pick them up? And the group home says, no, sorry, we're not. Sometimes these are, and within group homes, there are varying levels. There are some group homes for juvenile, some for adults who have intellectual developmental disabilities. But sometimes you've got to have a consistent, supportive environment for someone, and when you don't have that, they get upset. And when they get upset, they don't very calmly say, "Pardon me, I'm upset." They act out. Yeah. And they act out. People don't know what to do. They come to the emergency department. So we have folks that we don't have any care that we can provide them, and they will be with us for weeks, months. We've had some exceeding year staying with us. This is not just Cone Health. This is all North Carolina hospitals. There are various things people have pointed out. Say lack of group homes and lack of appropriate community supports for folks. In some cases, there's a lack of outpatient behavioral health treatment, so people get to crisis and are brought to emergency departments. I will note on that there are a lot of counties that have been building behavioral health crisis centers as an alternative to an emergency department. So if you are in behavioral health crisis, that is a place where you can go. And it focuses on behavioral health, and you can do, there's sort of the less than 24-hour urgent care, but then if you need to be somewhere just for 5 days, you don't need to be in a full mental hospital, but just a few days to help you kind of get back on track, get you on some medicine, get you on
level out.
Yeah, level out pretty much. Yeah. So that has been really, really, really helpful. But we still have, again, kids that are angry at the world, and folks of really any age with intellectual developmental disabilities, that they're at the hospitals, in the emergency departments.
Wow.
Think about an ED. The lights are always on. Mm-hmm. The machines are beeping. It's a terrible environment. So that's a topic that for a long time we would talk to state lawmakers about, talk to North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services, try to get them aware, and finally about a year or so ago, we were kind of thinking through, we need to be telling this story more broadly. We need more people joining us in advocacy for these folks, because it's just, it's tragic. I saw there's one particular patient that we had an initiative to tour. This was over in Alamance County. We wanted to tour their county commissioners through and really thank them for their decision to fund a crisis center, which they recently funded, and it has been built over there. But I still remember one patient who would come to the window and bang on it and ask for his phone call.
Wow.
Repeatedly, because as far as he knew, he was in jail. And that is what it is like. We have a mix. At some of our facilities, we have a lockdown unit where people are kept to keep themselves safe. We don't have that at all of our facilities, and so staff are doing their best. In terms of staff that are doing their best, I don't want to diminish the impact of this on the people themselves who are staying at our hospitals for a long time. But I mean, the staff, they get afraid because folks get frustrated and they act out and they get physical, and staff get injured. And so we have spent a lot of time. I mean, all of our staff have the emergency call buttons on their badges, the duress call. We've increased security in the emergency departments. It's been tough, and then the impact on other patients. We reconfigured our pediatric emergency department at Moses Cone to kind of have a sort of separate space for those who were staying for a long time, because they were sort of coming over and like getting in the face of a 5-year-old who had broken an arm.
Yeah.
And it's just it's tough. And part of this goes back to, we used to, as a society, take anybody who was different and lock them up in a giant state mental institution. We, as a society, collectively said that's really not what we should do. If people can be served in the community, we should do that. Except we didn't build the supports necessary. And we also didn't recognize that, and forgive me if this sounds like too much of business economist, but it's a lot more efficient to take a whole bunch of people and put them in a single building in terms of the cost compared to serving people in the community. It just is. And so even if we were to have taken all of the money from the state mental hospitals and put it all in, that's just it's not enough.
Wow.
Yeah.
I did not know that was happening. I did not know that folks that were in distress were basically living in EDs.
Yep.
And hospitals.
And we've got a dedicated transitions of care team and folks that are dedicated to these types of cases, and they spend all day on the phone, emails, trying to find placement, calling to all the facilities within the state, sometimes finding facilities outside of the state. And then in the case of kids, you've got to go before a judge and get permission to take a North Carolina resident child ward of the state and move them to a different state. And a lot of time the judges will say, no, we shouldn't be shipping North Carolina children out of North Carolina. And I understand that argument. But sometimes the only place we can find is out of state. And frankly, sometimes if they've got some specialized issue, sometimes an out-of-state facility might be the premier option for them.
Wow.
Yeah. So how's this for a lighthearted, fun podcast?
Well, this is definitely not the lighthearted part of the podcast, but it's definitely enlightening. Just learning the things that you did in the legislature and how that has helped you with the things that you're doing now, and just the lens of seeing that, I think is very helpful for me anyway, and everybody that's listening, so they know how to go to their legislatures and say, or legislators I should say, and say, hey, we have a problem. How can we help change this?
Yeah.
This concludes part 1 of Dietrich's conversation with Ryan Blackledge of Cone Health. Tune in next episode for part 2.
We know you enjoyed this podcast today. So join us for the next episode of Greater Conversations. By the way, you can follow us on social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn. Be sure to smash that subscribe button. Also, be sure to visit our website at winstonsalem.com. The views and opinions stated in this podcast are solely those of the contributors and not necessarily those of our sponsors, distributors, or hosting companies. This podcast is copyrighted and cannot be reproduced without expressed written consent of Greater Winston-Salem, Inc. or your toast.